Hi, I'm Hannah, one of the historians here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. I'm joined today by Holocaust survivor Peter Somogyi. I met and interviewed both Peter and his wife Anna, I think in the summer of 2018. They've quickly become some of my very favorite people, just because they're simply delightful. So a couple of things before we get started. Peter was born in Pécs, Hungary as a twin to a Jewish family. And I just wanted to note before we actually get started on this program that each Holocaust survivor's story is unique to them. They differ because of a number of factors, one of them simply being that each person is an individual and their views, opinions, thoughts on life, how they look back on something will all be colored, by those views, how they tell their story even. But more importantly, they differ because of these other variables, such as their country of origin during World War II. The Germans invaded different countries at different times. Their economic standing sometimes potentially had a difference in how they came out of the war, how they went into the camps. Definitely their gender made a difference, absolutely. Their age made a difference. Some parents lied about their children's age, making them older, thinking that would benefit them. Some parents made their children younger, thinking that would benefit them. Children were hidden, and then absolutely made a difference about what camp you went into. That was a huge variable in your story. And in Peter's case, him being a twin made a huge difference for him. So I guess because of these variables, I truly believe that each Holocaust survivor's story is a very unique piece of our history. And that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter, and he can get started in telling y'all about his experience, I think beginning with the invasion of Hungary. So, Peter?
That's right. 1944, March 19, the Germans invaded Hungary, and from that moment on, they imposed right away their anti-Jewish laws. Within a couple of days, my father was taken away to forced labor, and we had to start wearing the yellow star. In about months later, we had to leave our home. We went into a ghetto where we stayed over there for about 2 months. And then one day just came the order, take only what you can carry with you. And we were taken into a horse stye for the Hungarian army's horse stye for waiting over there. And in July 6th in the afternoon, they told us, take everything, take only what you can carry with you. And we marched to the railroad station and right away started stuffing us into cattle cars, about 80 into a cattle car itself, with only one bucket for sanitary use, hardly any food. I think each family got one loaf of bread, but that's about it, what I remember. And they locked the car. Very hot because it was the middle of July, very hot. No food, no water, nothing. And not knowing where we are going, what's gonna happen, all what they told us, they're gonna relocate us. Well, we were relocated, yes. For 3 days and 3 nights, the train was moving, the children was crying. Even I, myself, I was crying a little bit because they just didn't know what's happening. We were hungry, we were thirsty, we couldn't sit properly because it was so stuffed with 80 people in that cattle car, you just couldn't move around. Anyway, after 3 days, 3 nights of traveling, we arrived to a certain place. Later on, we found out it's called Auschwitz-Birkenau. When they opened the doors for the cattle car, right away I saw first the German soldiers with the guns drawn, and also prisoners in their prisoner garb. Right away, everything go out, but leave all your belongings, leave it in there. We will relocate it. When you are relocated, we will bring it to you. So, opened up the door. The first thing that hit me, it was the smell. There was a very stringent, burning flesh, probably burning flesh smell. And then I look outside and I see a big building, looks like a factory, and a big chimney and the big flames coming out of it. It turned out it's not a factory, it's a factory of death. That's what it is. And we all got out of the railroad car, lined up, and waited what would happen to us. While we were standing over there, Mengele came around, asking for twins. My mother didn't know what to say. But first of all, when we arrived over there, my mother looked around and saw that it was people were separated or being separated. So she told us right away, don't say you are 11-year-old, just say 9. Maybe they will keep us together. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Anyway, Mengele coming around, asking for twins. My mother didn't know what to say. So she kept quiet. Second time, she kept quiet. The third time, she said, yes, I do have twins. At that moment, 2 other soldiers grabbed us. I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to my mother, my sister. They just grabbed us, took us right away and into a small ambulance, and the ambulance drove us to the F-Lager, part of the Birkenau section. The first thing, as soon as we got into the F-Lager and the barrack, the very first thing was we got our numbers. I became A17454. My team was A17455, and we lost our identity. We are not Peter and Thomas, but A74. And this number. A few minutes later, I remember that the man who Mengele put in charge, he was an older twin, and since we have about 30 pairs of twins, in the ages from 9 up to 16, 17. So this man was in charge because Mengele put him in charge because he used to be an officer in the Czech army and he knew discipline. He came right away and the very first question was asked him, when can I see my mother? And he just said, look outside over there, you see the chimney, the flames coming out. And this is what I found out, that I will never see her again. What happened basically, when they were lining up over there, they started sending them into an underground, big room where they were told undress, totally undress. Even my 13-half-year-old sister had to undress naked in front of his 16-year-old cousin. That was the ultimate degradation. In the last minute, not even knowing that within 5 minutes or 10 minutes they will be all dead. But they had to undress, they were stuffed into a room, a big washroom, apparently supposed to be a washroom, with the overhead funnels for water. However, when they were locked in, apparently they didn't let the water come in, but they threw in the canisters of Zyklon B, which was so effective that within a few minutes, most of them were dead. When later on, but I found out from people who were Sonderkommando, who used to work at that position, they say their memory is that that when they opened the doors, it looked like a pyramid of dead bodies. Because what happened is when the Zyklon B started coming up, the stronger ones started to climb on top of each other until there was no air whatsoever. And then all of them were dead. And this is the end. And from there, the Sonderkommando had to take them into the ovens to be burned. And that happened to my family. They were gassed and burned. We arrived over there into the barrack around 5 o'clock, and soon there was time for food. Well, since I haven't eaten much before that, hardly anything, I was hungry, but then when I looked at that food, I said, I can never eat. I can never even touch it. It's impossible to eat this one. Believe me, about 2 days later, when my hunger took over, yes, I started eating it. I was happy to eat it. Then the man who was in charge of us afterwards, they assigned our location where we were gonna sleep. It was those 3-tier wooden, I wouldn't say bed, wouldn't some, what?
Bunk beds.
Bunk bed, bunk bed. She's helping me because, and it's 6 to a place that was so tight that when one of us had to turn, all of us had to turn. And this was my introduction for the remainder of the time that I spent at the Auschwitz, you know. Next morning, pardon?
Sorry, I wanted to ask you, what were you thinking as such a young person at the time? What was your first night there like?
I was traumatized. I'm totally traumatized. I don't know what's happening. First of all, I found out that I will never see my mother again, ever. And traumatized, they hungry and they're not eating what came, and seeing other kids already acclimatized themselves to what's going on. For the first moment, I was just totally traumatized, remember. And then next morning, 6 o'clock, we all had to get up, and then we had to be counted. It was called an appel, lined up and to be counted. Sometimes we had to wait hours, sometimes 2 hours, until one of the German soldiers came and they picked up the count. Looked at it, they looked in there. The next morning, around after appel, we usually got to breakfast. Again, I didn't know what it was exactly, but being hungry, I started eating it. There was some pieces of blocks of bread given out to everybody. Not sliced, but in about 10 inches wide and bread together. And that was the breakfast with some fluid. I don't know whether it was tea, coffee, or just plain tea or coffee, something. We had this one, and around later on, we had to be taken to Mengele. That's the first time when we tete-a-tete, we were together with him. He was very polite, started measuring us. Couldn't believe it that we are 9-year-old and not 11, because we kept the 9-year-old all the way till liberation. We were 9-year-old. We couldn't believe it, and they questioned it. We even made sure that the date of birth is not 1933 but 35, to make sure that we don't fall on it. Anyway, he started his measuring, blood taking. Took about half an hour, and then he was very polite, unbelievable nice and polite. He was, I think you know, that doctor that changes from one Jekyll and Hyde. Okay, that's what I want to say. He was at that moment. He was really polite, nice. We were very impressed with him, and he was very impressed with us because when he was listening some classical music, my brother identified, and right away there was a little rapport between all the three of us. Anyway, that was over, and then the regular routine started. Get up early in the morning, standing in line to be counted, going to wash. One thing that hit me right away, when we went to the washroom on the road, always saw dead bodies lined up on the side. What happened, one of the barracks housed skin and bone men, skin and bone. And never went into the barrack, but I don't know what really was the experiment in it. Maybe how fast you can, how fast you die when not getting any food. Anyway, every morning when we went to the washroom on the way there, so 8 or 9 people laid down as Lincoln log, 1, 2, 2 and 2, or 3 on top. So the bodies, which later were taken away, but every morning there was a lot of bodies, and that's when I got used to see dead people. Just didn't bother me anymore. I have so many of them, just didn't bother me. Mengele was also very interested in dwarfs. There was a family of 7, 5 women and 2 men. The women were on the other side of the railroad, but the 2 men were also in our barrack. And there was also another dwarf, very sick, very deformed, that later on the man in charge of us put me in charge of him to make sure that he gets his food every day. And later on I had to sleep next to him. And one morning, there was a dead body next to me. And you know something, it didn't faze me anymore. I seen so much death around me that it just didn't faze me. Our days, we didn't have to work, we just have to be ready anytime Mengele wanted to have some experiments. Sometimes we had to take a walk over to Auschwitz itself, because he had offices in Auschwitz also. Sometimes we stayed behind, doing nothing, just being guinea pigs for his pleasure. Around September or early October, another Nazi officer, medical officer, came around, lined us up in the barrack. We had to stand up totally naked to look at us, how we look, selected us, wrote up our numbers, and the ones who were selected were locked into another room. That we knew right away that this is the end. This is the end because a couple of days before, the gypsy lager next to us, the gypsy lager was totally eliminated. About 1,000 or 1,500 people in one night, they gassed and burnt all of them. So they started already liquidating. And this man, just on his own, decided that we don't need these children anymore. We are not strong enough or big enough for work later on. So we are eliminated basically by him. Except when we were locked in, I had a little pocket knife given to me for slicing bread. And I said, when the Germans are coming to pick us up, I know I can't kill anybody. I had so much anger in me that I wanted to kill, but I knew that this little knife will not do any damage, major damage, but the anger in me was that at least I do some damage on that one soldier who comes around. Anyway, Mengele got wind of it and says, no, I am the one who decides when these children will be eliminated, not another officer who later on was, Mengele was very angry with him and sent him to the Russian front, which is, at that time was one of the biggest punishment to soldiers. Anyway, we survived that the second time, the gas chamber. First time when it was lined, and when my family went into the gas chamber, I was just pulled out in the last minute by Mengele. I always, at one time, I thought that he saved my life. No, he didn't. He just kept me alive for his own purposes. He wasn't in the business of saving lives because he was the angel of death who sent millions, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people into their death. We were witnessed one major event. Was and I don't know how much people know about the blowing up a crematorium number 4. It was blown up by some a heroic kid, a man. Somehow they got hold of some gunpowder. We don't know exactly the story. All what I know that I saw the crematorium being blown up. It was late October. All the men who were part of this affair, they were all dead. They were all shot to death, all of them. Towards the end, early January, there were 10 Russian prisoners of war also in our barrack, and they were just taken outside and shot because they didn't want any witnesses, any person left alive. After Stalingrad, where they got the biggest defeat, the German army biggest defeat, and most of the generals knew that they lost the war. They kept killing because they couldn't stop just to kill. They didn't want anybody to stay alive. So towards the end, about early January or mid-January, they emptied out the lager itself, the whole Birkenau, and we had to line up. And we knew that it's going to be one of those death marches because the people who were not able to walk, they were shot. Constantly while we are standing the line for to start move, all what we heard shooting because all the people who were not able to walk, they were shot. Finally, we started moving, and within a few, maybe 15, 20 minutes walking, suddenly we look around, there was no German soldiers around. What happened? The Russians are coming so fast that they just abandoned us, hightailed and disappeared. So we started walking from Birkenau to Auschwitz itself. But the problem was already there was no kitchen and there was no food. We didn't starve while we were there. Over there, we had our amount of food, but the last few days, there was no kitchen, there was no food. We started starving more than ever. In Auschwitz itself, we went into one of those big buildings that used to be a Polish army's barracks. We waited over there. Some people who went over earlier somehow were able to go and look around and found some food in the Germans' kitchens somewhere. But by the time I got over there, there was nothing. All what I got was a bottle of water. All what I got over there. We stayed over there, hungry, not knowing what's going to happen. January 27, early in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, I saw the first Russian soldier. And that's when I found out that, well, finally we are free.
And what was that like to realize that you were finally free, that you were liberated?
Yeah, you can't understand, you can't, it's a feeling, an emotion that just went through all of us that, hey, but we were also afraid at the same time. What happens if there's a counterattack by the Germans and they come back? And then they will be killing us. So a day and a half later in the evening, we asked the man who was in charge of us. We are about 10, 15 pairs of twins, and they asked him to take us away from here. So a day and a half after liberation, we started walking because we were afraid. First of all, there was no food. We were hungry. We were somewhere, maybe we will find some food, but they're staying over there. And the Russians at that moment, maybe later on, a week later, they started giving food to the people who left over there. But we were hungry and we started moving, being afraid of the Germans coming back and killing us. We started moving day and night, walking towards Krakow. It took us about 3 days. Finally, we arrived on Krakow, still very hungry because maybe in the somewhere we got a slice of bread somewhere. I don't remember exactly, but we were hungry. We got over there, and luckily, the man who was in charge of us finally found a place in Krakow where once a day we got some warm food. But that's not being enough. We started walking the streets and we knocking on doors, asking for slice of bread. Sometimes we got some something. Quite frankly, we starved more after liberation for a while because the Russians didn't care about us. Not like in the Western Front where the Americans started right away feeding everybody and making sure that they have food. We didn't. So asked the men about 10 days being in Krakow. Finally, the men found some transportation. We started walking towards east, sometimes on trucks, sometimes on open railroad cars, sometimes they walked, sometimes until it took us from my home to Auschwitz 3.5 days. From Auschwitz back to my hometown, it took us 2.5 months. And then finally we arrived. Arrived in my hometown. One of my mother's cousins was already back over there, so we stayed with him. We stayed in him for a couple of days. And his idea was, don't dwell on what happened to you. Go back to school, because that's the future that you have to have. So we went back to school, the same school that he used to beat us up. We went back to the same school because that was one of the better schools, basically. But the beating stopped, finally, miraculously. And by August, around August, I got wind that my father survived Dachau. As he said, he didn't want to come back because he knew that his whole family is gone. He heard what's going on in other places. But also, miraculously, he found out that his twin children survived at their home. So instead of going away somewhere else, we didn't want to come back. We came back. We started a new life. We went back to our own home. My father, we went back to our own house. Had to be cleaned up and everything because it was such a mess. some Russian soldiers stayed in there and they broke off with certain things. And my father remarried, and I got involved, very much involved in the Zionist movement. And in 1949 April, we had to escape Hungary again because that was the communist regime. You couldn't really just get out of it with a passport. There was no such thing. So we escaped through the border. It took us 6 weeks from my hometown down to Israel. 6 weeks through Bratislava, Vienna, Salzburg, and all this section. We stayed in Italy for a couple of days, and then finally an Israeli ship came and picked us up, took us into Israel, and on 1949, May 16, I arrived in Israel.
And Peter, what was that like for you and your brother and your father to get to Israel?
Pardon?
Sorry, what was it like for you and your brother when you got to Israel?
Well, first of all, the first feeling was I never have to look behind me. I have never looked behind me. We arrived over there. We went into a camp where they decided who is going to where, because the shipload, there was a lot of refugees, a lot of survivors. Each had to go somewhere. We children, with the Aliyat HaNoar, we were sent into Kibbutz Matsuba, where was already some surviving kids over there. I stayed in the kibbutz for 2 years, learned the language, which was very important. And on the 18th birthday, I had to enlist in the Israeli army. So I was in the army for about 2.5 officially, but since I went through the officer school, I had to finish the school. I stayed longer in the army. Finally, I left the army. I stayed in Israel for the next 7 years, total 7 years. And in 1956, for certain, left Israel, went to England. I stayed over there for 2 years. Since I learned a trade while I was in Israel, I learned the trade, automobile electrician. It was easy, very easily. When I got to England, within a month, I had a job. Stayed in England for about 2 years. Moved to Canada. Immediately, I got a job as an automobile electrician. I was 12 years in Canada. 1960, I met my future wife, at that time on a blind date. But we are together for 58 years. We stayed in Canada for about, I stayed about 12 years, and then got an offer to the States, and I moved to the States. And in 1970, moved to the States, and ever since I'm in the States. I have 2 kids born in Montreal, Canada, and I have 4 grandkids. And that's my life story in a nutshell.
I think that's wonderful. I was wondering if you don't mind, we have some time, and I'd like to skip ahead to 1985. And if you wouldn't mind talking about going to Israel for the mock trial of Dr.
Yeah, that was a mock trial of Mengele, attended by Gideon Hausner, who was the chief prosecutor of Adolf Eichmann, Telford Taylor, who was one of the chief prosecutors in Nuremberg trial, Simon Wiesenthal, who was a well-known Nazi hunter, Yehuda Bauer was a historian, and Tzvi Terlo was an attorney. Those 5 people were at that mock trial, where a lot of people did their testimony. For instance, one of the women who gave birth, and Mengele tied her breast so the baby cannot feed and waited until the baby dead. However, the woman in the testament said that she killed her baby because she didn't want to have suffered her. So that was one of the highlights. And that woman said, I killed my baby. There was also Michael Reichenberg, whose vocal chords were cut by Mengele because he was a good singer, and I don't know, he was to study the vocal cords or whatsoever. He cut his chord, but later on he was able to talk with this certain instrument that you put against the. Also, there was a TV speaker who gave testimony at that time. He was the one who was in charge of all the kids. His testimony was very, very strong, very strong testimony. And
so what was that like for you and your brother to go and hear all these other twins talk about their experience? What did that do for you?
Well, we remembered ours also at the same time while they were talking about theirs. I remember I came back and they went through my own testimony, I mean, my own history, what's happened over there at the camp. While listening to him, most of it was familiar to us. So when, for instance, a three speaker who was in charge of all the twins, when he was talking, everything came back to us. It was 85 since 20 odd years from liberation. 40? 40 to 80, yeah, 40, about 40 years, yeah. And you went through, and the very funny, very interesting was what happened is while we were sitting over there, one person asked, can we see all the twins who survived and are here? Could you please stand up? Big load of us, lots of us stand up. And it was basically thanking three speakers who made sure that we survived. He was the one who made sure us survive. And he gave his testimony, and also that woman who killed and Reichenberg, who was vocal, he gave testimony. And that's about it. What was at the mock trial? It lasted 3 days. The whole press, the world press was there, and one interesting thing was the German ambassador was there also, and listened to the whole testimony, and he promised some restitution. What kind of restitution he can give to the loss of my family, my mother, my sister, my grandmother? What kind of restitution? Because some monetary restitution. It's a very small amount. It was just about enough that I took my wife and my 2 kids back to Auschwitz to show them where I was. That was just about enough money to go back to Auschwitz and show it to them. That was restitution.
And what was it like going back to Auschwitz with your children? I mean, what did that do for you internally?
Well, first of all the memories. And then again, it was quite a lesson to my kids, what I went through, and really see what kind of, because unfortunately, by the time we got over there, the barracks were not standing anymore. They were all burned down. Just the same as just before liberation, the whole Canada section, I don't know if I didn't talk about Canada, it was a big section of Birkenau, where all the clothes that was taken off the trains that we had to leave there, and all the clothes that was taken from before the gas chamber, they were all taken over there. And that that was the first time I had to work at that time. Middle of the winter, we had to empty that big warehouse of Canada and load the stuff onto trains going back to Germany. And that's the time when we had to really work. That's the first. But I showed the whole place. We went through even one of the barracks. At that time was still standing, one of the barracks. Looked exactly how the section where we were sleeping, how that looked like. So it was a very, I can't get the word, emotional, yeah.
So I was wondering, what motivates you to talk about your Holocaust experience? I know you go to schools and you do a lot of talks with groups.
I haven't spoken for the next 60 years probably. I haven't spoken. I didn't ever discuss it with my brother. We never talk about it again. I never talked about it to my father. I even asked my wife when I met her first time, I tell you the story once, but please don't ask me again. I will never talk about it. And I didn't talk about it and clamped up for at least 60 years. And then came to the realization that there are so many Holocaust deniers that only a few of us who survived, and it's a very few, probably by 10, 15 years, there will be no survivor at all. So they can go around and deny it ever happened. Up till now, I'm here to say, yes, it did happen because I was there. But in 10, 15 years, I'm 87 right now. What's happening? How much more I have? So by then, all this denial can have a field time to keep on denying it. And that's what made me to start talking about it.
I think that's wonderful. It's a great reason to talk about it. So I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to start reading you some of the questions that our audience is interested in having you answer, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. If I can answer it, I will.
All right. Well, Justine wants to know, after the war, how much did you follow the news of different governments and groups trying to catch Dr. Mengele and bring him to trial? How interested were you in that?
I was very interested, and especially after the mock trial, then the US government started going after him also. Mengele was in the United States, not the United States, Mengele was caught by the Americans, but they let him go. I don't know how, I don't know why, but they let him go. He was captured by the Americans and they let him go. Anyway, after the mock trial, the United States government started earnestly looking after him. And that's when they finally found out that he died on a swimming accident.
And so, as a Holocaust survivor, what did you think of Nazi hunters, of Simon Wiesenthal?
I met him a couple of, first of all, he was at the mock trial, and later at one affair there was something in Brooklyn where he was speaking. I was very much for him. I very enthusiastically supported everything what he did, because he was really working very hard to find all the Nazis, to bring them to justice. And his lifelong ambition was later on to bring them to justice.
And so I have another question from Jan. Can you comment on your faith, your thoughts on God, and whether it helped you or if it had nothing to do with your experience?
Well, I was a very devout religious family, not Orthodox, but very religious. We kept all the holidays, we kept all the Shabbat, we were Shomer Shabbat. And I went to shul every Friday and Saturday. And once arrived into Auschwitz itself, and I found out that my mother was burnt in the gas chamber. My question was, where was God when my mother went into the gas chamber? And that changed my whole attitude about religion. I'm still Jewish, I'm still keeping the tradition. One tradition is New Year's Day, when the whole family comes together every time. One tradition is the Passover, where all the family comes together. And that's the holidays that I keep. But I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not a believer, because I can't believe that God let my mother go to the gas chamber.
And we're just gonna switch a little bit, a different vein of a question. So Lindsay is asking, what was the transition back to civilian life for you? I guess, how did that work to go from being in a concentration camp to...
I was a young kid, an 11-year-old young kid. Civilian life it's just started going back to school. That was the whole thing, going back to school. And then stayed with school. The rest of the civilian life, my father came back, we went back into our home, then I escaped Hungary, went to Israel. That's a civilian life that I enjoy. I enjoy my life because I have a very good life. I have a beautiful wife and a lovely wife, 2 kids, 4 grandkids. I love it.
All right. So Emily said that she is a teacher, and she's asking, what do you want our younger generation to understand and be taught in schools based on your experience?
Yes, they have to learn about discrimination. Discrimination by color, by faith, to know that all people are equal. The hatred, they should refrain from hatred, because we are all God's children, as they say. Mostly the discrimination, whether it's color, whether it's faith, they should learn from it that it should never happen again.
There are a lot of questions in the side panel here about your brother. I know you mentioned that he went with you to Israel. Do y'all talk about your experience now, like in the recent years?
Well, my brother is about 500 miles away from me. He's in Toronto, Canada. He lives over there. We see each other not that often because the distance is too much, but we talk on the phone and sometimes Skype. Lately, Skype is there, so we talk quite often.
And so I have another question about having been a Holocaust survivor and dealing with anti-Semitism in its largest form, what do you think about the somewhat rise of anti-Semitism that we see today?
It's terrible. It's terrible. I don't know what made it, but apparently they treat us, they don't lose their spots. And anti-Semitism was always there. And unfortunately, some people stalk it even more right now. And it's terrible.
And so do you, and Mike Dailey wants to know, do you keep in touch with the other survivors, the other twin survivors? Or?
Unfortunately not. We lost contact. The moment we came home, everybody went to his own direction. And I met a couple of them last time when we were in Israel, or some of them when we were on the mock trial. And last year, some of the survivors, twins, were met in Jerusalem, but that's about it. Otherwise, everybody went his own way. Some of them passed away already.
Okay, well, I think our final question is going to be, after this experience, and you came through it alive and intact, what would you want this audience listening to you today, what do you want them to come away with?
That's a very simple answer. It should never happen again. It should never happen. They learned from it that discrimination, just because they have a different religion, different skin, discrimination should not ever happen again.
I think that's a great message. I just want to let you know, Peter, that there are many comments in the side here that people are just overwhelmed. They are so thankful for you for sharing your story and going through these memories one more time, which they all know is not easy, and they just—
No, it's not easy. Quite frankly, it's not easy.
But they thank you, and they think it's an important story, and they're just so happy that you're willing to do it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate everyone listening. Thank you so much, Peter. You're amazing.
Thank you. I'm just a survivor. Just a few of the survivors, because there are only few survivors. When you count 6 million people, and there's only a few survivors by number. And I'm lucky one of them.
And we're lucky that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning for our talk with Peter Somogyi. We appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too, thank you. Thank you.